Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. Welcome to part 7 of the guide to breaking into the tech industry for beginners, people who want to change careers into technology. My name is Dan Kwan. I'm a full stack software engineer based in New York City. This is my website right here, Turbo360, and it's basically designed for people who want to learn technology from a beginner standpoint and trying to break into tech. So if you want to pursue this as a career, this is a good place to begin. A lot of tutorials for learning a modern tech stack. And again, as always, I want to thank Aaron Clary from Asshole Consulting, who's been kind enough to somewhat sponsor this series on his channel as well. This is Aaron. And Aaron runs a great service where if you have questions about general life issues like how to manage your career, how to manage your finances, how to deal with relationships, or even things like how to get in shape and stuff like that. He's a great resource for that. So I would recommend checking out his website as well as his YouTube channel, and or if you're just bored, he's pretty funny, so you can just check him out for that. So great. So in the first 6 parts of this series, we talked about the various areas of tech, mobile, front end, back end, things like that. In this video, we want to get into how to actually proceed, how to actually get started, learn the learning process, so that hopefully 12 to 24 months from now, you can be working as a professional developer. So let's get into it. So, one of the common things that people do these days, I'm just looking at my notes here, so is go through what's called a boot camp, a coding boot camp. Coding boot camps have become very popular in the past roughly 5 or 6 years, where basically you go for 12, anywhere between 12 and 16 weeks, full time. So you have to quit your job, no school, nothing like that, and do nothing but code for that whole time for maybe 60 hours a week for 12 weeks or as much as 16, even 17 weeks I've seen. And these are become very popular because they've essentially sold the dream of going from a novice to a professional programmer earning $100,000 a year within 3 months. So right now we're in mid-May of 2018. Imagine by the end of summer you're working as a professional programmer starting from zero. That's kind of the dream they sell. Now, I want to emphasize the word dream. These people are selling a dream that many people cannot actually attain. All right, going from zero to professional programmer in 3 months is a completely, I wouldn't call it ridiculous, but extremely ambitious goal. And not too many people can actually do that. I'll tell you right now, I did not accomplish that in 3 months. It took me around a year and a half of self-study to go from zero to like a complete novice, having never programmed before, to a professional programmer. Now, of course, I was doing a self-study. I didn't go to a boot camp. But you have to be aware that the boot camp industry has taken on a bit of a negative reputation amongst tech companies in this time frame in the past 3 to 5 years. So you should proceed at your own caution. Um, from an outsider's perspective, they seem like a great deal. You pay a certain amount of tuition, typically around $15,000, sometimes as high as $18,000, $19,000. And then after a 3 month period, you become a professional programmer earning 100K. And that's the sort of the dream they sell. Um, from the outsider's point of view, it sounds great. You got to remember there's two sides to this equation, though. And the companies that are hiring don't quite see it that way. A lot of the boot camps have been pumping out poor graduates in the past 3 to 5 years whose skills are just not standard or substandard, who cannot actually problem solve, who require tons of hand holding, who are just not really high caliber developers, not really ready for a professional context. And so you have to go in knowing which ones of those boot camps carry what reputation. It's becoming a lot like college. You know, if somebody says, "Should I go to college?" Like, I'm 18 years old. Should I go to college? Well, that's a pretty broad-ended question. Like, it depends on which college, obviously, right? If you're 18 and you have your options between going to, like an MIT or a Caltech to study engineering or work on your own, well then yeah, go to MIT and go to college. If your options are Joe Schmo Community College or study on your own, then forego college. It's going to hold you back. So it depends. As always, the answer depends. Boot camps, same thing. So there are a lot of boot camps now in the United States, many of which are really shitty, and they're just trying to pump students in and out to get that tuition revenue, and they do that by selling you a dream. It's not unlike like dating coaches, kind of like all those pickup guys that I used to do a few years ago, where they would say like, oh, you don't have to be good looking, you don't have to be in shape, we'll just teach you the right things to say and you can get any girl you want. They're selling you a dream. That's what they're doing. They're using your emotions against you. And that's what's happening a lot in the bootcamp industry as well. You have to be aware of that and you have to go in with the right mindset. Otherwise, you're going to be $15,000 lighter in the wallet and you still won't have a job. I've met a lot of bootcamp graduates in New York City who just suck at programming. I want to be clear about that. I just wouldn't hire them. They're not good. And they're the ones who spent $16,000, $17,000 and lost 3-4 months of the bootcamp time. So whatever they would have been doing in that period, they lost that opportunity cost as well. And a lot of it can be broken down by bootcamp. Now, I'm not going to name any names, but I will tell you how to make these distinctions. A lot of boot camps simply teach an outdated curriculum. That's number one. So back in 2012, 2011, when these camps were getting started, they were teaching what was considered a rather modern curriculum at that time. Keep in mind, that's 6 years ago. And that would be like Ruby on Rails for the back end, which we discussed in my back end video. I think that was video 4. jQuery, and maybe Angular 1, right? And this is a pretty modern stack from 5 or 6 years ago. Today, that's an outdated stack, but a lot of these boot camps haven't caught up. They haven't made the adjustments because they have to constantly changing their curriculum, and hiring new developers who can teach that new curriculum is very expensive. Like, for example, I've been reached out to by a couple of boot camps to teach Node, React, and Redux. But what they were offering in payment just wasn't enough. And I'll tell you right now that some of the payments were around 8 to 10K a month for full time, which is a pretty good monthly sum. That's a 6-figure salary full time. It's still not worth it to me because I do much better than that on my contract work, and I don't work full time. I don't work 40 hours a week. So it's a simple mathematical reality that it's hard to hire people qualified to teach a modern stack. If somebody wants to hire me to teach React, Redux, Node Express with a GraphQL server on their bootcamp, I'd be happy to do so, but you're gonna have to pay me a lot of fucking money, and that's the reality of the situation. So what these bootcamps do is they hire people who can only do the easier stacks, the sort of the stuff that's been around for a long time, and that keeps their expenses down. And as long as the consumer side doesn't know the difference, then they're just still cutting revenue every 3 months. They're just churning in people in and out every 3 months. It's kind of like just getting people in and out, and that's it. And then what happens afterwards is their problem, right? And I don't blame the boot camps. I blame the consumer. Boot camps are businesses trying to make money, and as long as they render the service they say they render, and that might be teaching an outdated curriculum, well, then it's on the consumer to make that decision, right? And nobody's forcing them to hand over this money or go into debt and hand over this money. So a lot of these boot camps are teaching an outdated curriculum. And right now that mostly consists of Ruby on Rails and jQuery only. If you see something like Node Express with like a React on the front end with Redux, that should include Redux. You're looking at a very modern, up-to-date curriculum. That's a solid curriculum. But then there are those that just have maintained the same curriculum in the past 5 years, which in technology is an eternity. 5 years in technology is like 100 years in real life. So imagine what doctors were doing 100 years ago in 1918. Imagine the medical practice in 1918 profession versus what it is today. Like how different that is. That's essentially technology in 5 years. So it's a drastic, accelerated pace of change. I said I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to point out a couple outdated curriculums. So here I found a couple right here. This is a curriculum that could have been applied in 2012, and it would have been the same things. A lot of this is eternal, like JavaScript, APIs, and database theory, but like Ruby and Rails, they're teaching a Rails curriculum that could have been. This probably was written in 2012 and hasn't changed ever since. So that's a very big red flag. And these guys, let's see, what are they charging? Let's find the curriculum real quick. 15 large, so to learn an outdated curriculum. So you decide whether or not you want to drop that kind of coin on a curriculum that could have been applied 5 years ago. I wouldn't do that. So that's number one. Number two, this is another one, same idea right here. This is one of the bigger boot camps in the industry. They were actually just bought out a couple months ago. I think it was like $700 million that they were purchased for. But here, same thing, $15,000 tuition, $14,000 to give or take, depending on which cohort. And then let's go through the actual content. So basic fundamentals, this is like everyone needs this, so that's good stuff. But once again, Ruby on Rails. See, Ruby on Rails, MVC. Now they do get into some Node stuff here, which is good. That's modern. So that's a good sign. But what I don't see, especially on the front end, is React. It's just basic JavaScript and jQuery. I mean, that's like high school level stuff. I can teach a high school kid, a smart high school kid, how to do all this without charging him $15,000. And I say that because I have done that. So I have hired high school kids who show a certain level of aptitude and just basically explain shit to them until they get it, and then they can just do it, right? That's jQuery and JavaScript. It's not at the beginner level, So you're gonna spend $16,000 or 15K to learn that with this fancy schmancy boot camp. Well, then that's your decision. You go ahead and do that. But what you should be looking for is a much more modern curriculum. I cannot teach a high school kid React Redux, even if he's smart. Like, it would take a lot of time. Like, I would have to really like devote my time and energy to it. Whereas like regular JavaScript and jQuery, give me a smart focused high school kid and I just need a couple hours a week, and that's it. I just get him going on a few things and he'll pick it up in a couple weeks, and then we're off and running now. I can start getting some return on that investment, and I've done that. So that's one of the main considerations on a boot camp. Number two, the tuition obviously is very important, but the actual format of the tuition matters as well. What you should do is look for boot camps that don't charge tuition until you get paid. So what that means is, like, if you go through a boot camp and then after the boot camp's over, you start looking for a job. At that point, you should still have paid nothing. And then once you get a job, then you pay a percentage of your salary. And that's a good tuition model, because that proves that the boot camp has to deliver on that promise. Otherwise, they don't get paid, right? So, what they do then is they make sure that the people they allow into their boot camp cohort, they're called cohorts, the graduating classes, have the highest likelihood of getting a job beforehand. So a lot of boot camps, not a lot, but a handful operate in that fashion, which is good, because then they're basically placing a bet on you. And a big part of now that boot camps have been around for over half a decade, like I said, they're developing a reputation kind of like colleges do. You have your dumb colleges and your smart colleges. Well, you have your dumb boot camps and your smart boot camps. So you want to be associated with one of the smart ones. And make sure, a lot of that falls under how the boot camp charges their tuition. So if they're charging tuition based on whether or not you get a job, then they're going to make bets on smarter people, and you want to be associated with that. So a good example is this boot camp right here. They do that. App Academy. You'll see that right here. We don't charge tuition for the course until you get a job as a developer, and typically the percentage from the developer salary is like 22%, so like a little bit over 1/5. So if you're making $70,000, what's 1/5 of 75? It's like $14,000. So maybe like 15,000 is what you end up paying after you get that first job for the first year, and then after that you keep all your salary. And to me, that's a reasonable way of doing it, because the bootcamp is not putting their money where their mouth is, and they're not selling you a dream. The risk is on their end. The flip side about that, if there is any, is that these boot camps will make a lot more bets. So they'll bring in cohorts of like 25 people, because they'll know that out of 25, like 5, 6, 7 of them will just drop out. They just won't make it. They'll just quit, right? And then you're down to like 18 or so, 19, and of those, like let's say 20 for a round number. Another like 5 or 6 just won't get jobs. Like they're just not going to make that at the other end. They just won't get hired because they're not good enough. And then the rest is they bank their tuition on the remaining percentage that does end up with a high-paying job. So that's sort of the flip side, if you want to call it that. It's still a good deal if you ask me. What you don't want to do is end up in a boot camp where anyone can go if you just simply have the money, and then you're going to get a lot of stupid people, and then that's going to be the perception of your cohort, and over time, as more and more boot camps, um, more and more cohorts graduate from that boot camp, that will become their reputation, and then eventually that'll just be the boot camp reputation, and that recently forced a couple boot camps to shut down. Um, Dev Boot Camp and Iron Yard. These are two boot camps that shut down in the past year. I'm not saying that was the reason, but uh, let's just say some of those associations I was describing, they did apply to Dev Boot Camp in my experience. Dev Boot Camp had a heavy presence in New York City, and a lot of their graduates went to my workshops. I'll just leave it at that. So that's the boot camp route. Let's see here. I'll just give you a couple examples of what I consider good boot camps, and by that I mean they have broadly speaking, a good reputation. Some of the examples are Full Stack Academy and Grace Hopper. They're the same organization. Galvanize has a pretty solid reputation. Flatiron School, Flatiron, like the building in New York City, has a pretty solid reputation as well. So I would consider those decent options. And then everything else, do your own research. So, but do it within the prism of the parameters I just described. Okay, let's see what else. So if you decide that bootcamp isn't for you because of all the stuff I just described, then your other option is self-taught, right? So I'm self-taught, and that obviously has its own challenges. The way you want to look at self-taught is that you want to make sure you're learning the content and the technologies that are coming down the pipe, which is a very hard assessment to make if you're completely a newcomer, obviously. So it takes a lot of research. But if you really put your energy into it, you can figure out which technologies are coming down the pipe. You don't want to be playing catch up. That's the thing. You don't want to play catch up. You want to be one step ahead, even though you're just getting started. It's a very tall order. Of course, it's going to be hard. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but that's the way you want to look at it. So here's what I mean. When I was starting out, prior to 2010, I'd never programmed a single line of code in my entire life. Okay, so I'd never programmed. And by the way, I was out of college at that point, so I wasn't one of those like 12-year-old kids like programming, in their like bedroom at night. Like I was out of college, and I'd never programmed before my entire life. And we're going back to 2010. So what I looked around sort of the industry, and I was like, okay, so let me assess where my best chances are. And that answer was iOS, because iOS at that point was so new. The programming labor supply has not really matured at that point. And the technology was extremely new. It had only been open to the general public for like 2 years. So I realized that, going into like basic web development, database development, stuff like that, I would have so much catching up to do that I probably would never get there, because everyone else I'm trying to catch up to, they were getting better at the same time. Whereas with iOS, I realized that I can really kind of catch up, or at least make myself competitive, because it was not something that there was a major amount of senior developers. For example, at that point in time, an iOS developer with 3 years of experience didn't exist, because iOS as a platform didn't exist for more than 2 years. So that means at the absolute maximum, I'm competing with people who have maybe 1 to 2 more years of experience than I do. I can compete with that. I can catch up to that. But if you're looking at someone with 10 years more experience in a commensurate technology, no chance. No chance. So let's say, for example, now you want to go into iOS today in 2018 using native Swift and Xcode, right? Not React Native, but Swift and Xcode. Yeah, good luck with that. You're just not going to catch up. People like me, and there's many people like me, would just destroy your skill level, right? And so what you need to do is figure out what areas that people like me have no exposure in yet, because the technology itself hasn't been around long enough. That's what you really need to be thinking of if you're a newcomer. And then you really want to get on top of that now, so that when that technology becomes mainstream in roughly 12 to 24 months, you're ready, and you're ready to go. And hopefully you'll be charging a lower rate than I am, and you'll compete for the bids that I'm competing for, and you'll beat me. That's how that's going to work. That's the only way it's going to work at a competitive level for a high price scale, a high pay scale. Right? If you're going to compete with me on the technologies where I'm already good, you'll never catch up. And that goes for everyone in my caliber that is as a senior level developer. So like, forget just iOS. Like, like Node, Express, React, Redux, Python, Django, whatever. These things have been around now for a long time. So the questions and the research you have to do as a self-guided um, person, a self-guided study person, whatever you want to call it, is identify the technologies that are coming down the pipe and then really get good at those. So right now, one example would be something called GraphQL. That's only been around for maybe 2 years. And it's going to be mainstream in about another 2 years. I'm telling you that right now. That one's for free. Just do it. That'll get you going in the right path. Another one is anything crypto. So blockchain technology, Ethereum, any of that stuff. If you get going on that right now, you will be ahead of me in a few months. You'll be better than me in a year, and you will get all those bids that if I'm going for them, you'll beat me on those bids because I'm not going to get into that anytime soon, or at least I don't think I will. I mean, if the money's there, I will, but right now I got plenty on my plate. So you want to get into that now. They're not teaching cryptocurrency at any of these boot camps. I don't know if, I mean, take a look at all the curriculums. You won't see anything cryptocurrency related, anything blockchain related. You won't see it. So if you really get on that now, it's a good thing to get into because it's kind of mainstream. I mean, everyone's heard Bitcoin now, but you talk to like most tech people, like a guy like me, like I've been hearing about Bitcoin since 2012, right? So these things are not as new as they seem. That's what you got to realize. So, blockchain technology and all that stuff, it's been around, but it is just now becoming mainstream. You still have some time on that. You want to get on that. If you're going to do this on your own, if you're going to go it alone, that's a good thing to get into. Um, let's see. Yeah, so those two as well as anything artificial intelligence. So like all those those talking technologies like Alexa, Amazon Alexa, Siri, all that stuff that talks. That's done through lots of AI stuff, and like anything along those lines is still very new and cutting edge. You want to get into that, and that the skill level there, the labor supply there hasn't quite caught up to the demand. So you want to get into that now, and that's a pretty challenging area, but it's easier said than done. But it's a good thing to get into because it will become much more mainstream in the next 12 to 24 months. And if you're catching that wave right when your skill level is catching up, then essentially what happened to me will happen to you. Sort of the iOS wave like scooped me up, and I just picked up all this work in iOS back in 2012, and then from that point forward, I never looked back since. It was just that enabled me for me to continue my career into whatever else I wanted to, which is exactly what I did. My strategy would not work today if I used iOS to break in. It would not work. I would have to use something else like artificial intelligence, like cryptocurrency, and things like that. So if it were up to me, I would do it that way because I wouldn't want to drop 15K on a bunch of courses that I don't think are the most progressive. Um, and so that would be my approach. But I'm not saying that's right for everybody. That's just my approach. I'm a very sort of self-focused individual, and I just end up doing everything on my own anyway. Um, so yeah, those are the major considerations. The last thing I left out is college. College is a bit of an X factor now. I think most people watching this video are not even considering college because I think the average age of this video is it's probably mid to late 20s. But if you are considering college or maybe going back to college, make sure similar to boot camp, it's a very similar consideration. Make sure the curriculum is very modernized. That's a big problem in college. You're teaching curriculum that's very like not modern. And that the school you go to has a good reputation. Um, for me personally, I don't think I would have gone to college. If I was 18 again, I don't think I would have gone to college unless I was going to an MIT or a Caltech or a Carnegie Mellon, like the cream of the crop, which I didn't get into those schools. Um, so yeah, I would have just gone solo again anyway. So um, there's a lot more to be said about the whole college experience, but I'll leave that to Aaron. He has a lot more good insight on that. So, okay, so that's my take on how to get started if you want to break into technology. Hopefully there's a lot of insight here that you could put to use. Hopefully it's very actionable. If you have any questions or comments or anything like that, you can sign up on my website and you can reach me on Slack that way, or you can here's my email too. You can just send me an email if you want to contact me with any questions or anything like that, and I'll do my best to get back to you as far as answering your questions goes. Thanks again for watching, and once again, I'd like to thank Aaron Clary for co-promoting this video. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out, and I'll do what I can to get back to you. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you soon.